all of the students kind of agreeing, and then I see two or three other parallels, and they're all saying the same thing as the sheikh. So that gives me confidence, right, that this person's report is sound. So if there are, it can be one of two ways. Either the number of reports about the sheikh, right? So he might not have like a lot, but I have so many reports about him saying that, oh, he's trustworthy and he's sound and he's upright and blah blah blah. And I might have like a dozen reports. That still gives me confidence in him, right? Because you have so many scholars and so many muhaddithin who have spoken about him. And the other way, like we had mentioned initially, is because he has so many reports, it becomes easy to judge his reports. Um, Talking about groups of people, right? So there's when you're talking about a sheikh, or when you talk about, like, for example, group of people, and in this case is if you have a group of students, right? If you have a group of students, you can say in general, his students are, they're also sound, right? Because they all narrate the same thing, and there's corroboration from parallel chains, and therefore it's easy for us. Not only do we trust the sheikh, but we can trust his students as well. Um, and you have this happens with later scholars. So you have, for example, Imam al-Dhahabi and Ibn Hajar, who came later and who do this. And why is that? Why is that okay? Like, why is it okay for me to group these people together and say, oh, their narrations are okay? Yeah. And this is something it requires a little bit of thinking. And why it's like, oh well, if you have to focus so much on individuals and look what the scholars have to say about them, this grouping that's happening, how is that okay? How is it okay for you just to group these narrators together and say, oh, these narrators are good? What is the most important part of the chain? The bottleneck, right? So does it matter if there are 3, 4, 10, 20 people before him? Right? The moment it comes here, this is the person who becomes the most important. Are these other people important? Yeah, they are. But do I need to go into as much detail about all these people as I do this person? Right? This person will confirm everything that comes before him. And the same thing happens when? After him. So do you understand now why it's not as important? Again, it's important, but it's less important. That's why it's okay to group these scholars together and group these students together. So the muqillin, these are individuals who have few narrations. Why is that a problem? So if I have someone who has 3 narrations, is it easy for me to make a ruling on him? Why? There's limited information, right? There's very little for me to compare, right? I can't judge that person's, like, especially if it's an issue that it might be a general issue, right? Or it might be a story that, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam passed through this valley. Is there a ruling that's there? I don't have anybody else narrating it. Can I confirm it? Can I deny it? Right? And it was like, okay, well, he passed through this, and this is all the information I have. Right? I don't have any other information about this person. So this person would be called a muqil fi riwaya, that he has very few narrations. So what I can do, the best I can do, is I can try to gather whatever narrations I can. What else can I find out? What else can I look at? Hmm. Right. I can look at his mashayikh. I can look at his teachers. Uh huh. Okay. So by getting his teachers, it gives me an idea of the proximity and the locality where he is. All right. And maybe even the time period. Good. What else? Okay. If I can try to find any other types of narrations, or narrations that are similar, right? Similar in wording. Mm-hmm. Sense, right? See where his hadith are, right? Which books are his hadith recorded in? And if I find that his hadith are recorded in, right, XYZ books, it gives me confidence in his narrations. Like, what else? His students. Yes? Right? So it's important to look at his teachers. It's important to look where his narrations are recorded. It's important to look at his students. It's also important for me to look at his biography, right? See where I can find information about him. And after gathering all of this information, I can come to a conclusion. Is Will it happen every time? No, because sometimes I just won't have enough information. So That's why it's difficult and that's why it's challenging. Individual who has some reports. So what does that mean? So here, Sheikh Hatem, he's put this into two categories. He says basically, if I have somebody who has between 150 and 180 reports, or 250 to 300 reports, right? So that sounds like a lot, right? It's a, but this is actually very few. Yeah, yeah, this is actually very few reports, versus having like 1,000 reports, right, or 1,500 reports, or 2,000 reports or greater. So he's saying that this is basically enough information for me to come to a concrete ruling onto a narrator. So these individuals called the mutawasitin. It just requires a complete study of all of his narrations, but even those can be classified into two general categories: those narrations that can be attributed to him, and those narrations that cannot. Meaning that sometimes you'll have him mentioned in the chain, but later in the chain there's a problem. It could be a break. It could be yeah, right. It could be anything that's happening. It could be tadlis or whatever the case might be. So the problem, if I have a chain and there's a break later in the chain, can I ascribe this hadith to him? No, right? I can't do that. So that's this category. And then if I say the rest of the hadith, if the chain is sound before it and this chain is sound after it, then I have confidence to ascribe the hadith to him. And even those can be attributed. There are two ways to attribute it: loan reports, meaning that he's the only one that narrated it, which is possible, or he shares it with someone else, right? There's parallel chains that he shares it with. The mukthirun, right? These are individuals who have many reports. And these are the hadith that are found in the 6 books, and they have many, 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 many reports. Sometimes you have those that have gharib reports. Even they will have many reports, but most of the narrations they're strange, right? They're anomalous, they're strange, they're gharib. You have a hadith that are mentioned in the books of ilal, because sometimes you will have somebody who is problematic in his narrations, but he'll still have many narrations. Some books that mention these ilal are Al-Kabir by Imam al-Tirmidhi, Musnad Bazzar, Ilal Ibn Abi Hatim, Al-Daraqutni. Daraqutni we know to be, and Ibn Abi Hatim and Imam al-Tirmidhi are great, well-known nuqad. Bazzar, lesser known. And the books of narrators that mention some narrations. So you have books that are later, like you have Tahdhib al-Kamal, for example. You have Tahdhib al-Tahdhib. Both of these mention individual narrations. You have the early books of Tarikh, like you have Tarikh al-Kabir by Imam Bukhari, right? So you have early books that talk, like, basically it's just like a list of narrators, right? So and so, and he was da, and it is known that he narrated this, right? And then it'll bring the hadith. So it's not meant to be a book of narrations, but sometimes they'll mention it as an example of his narration. I forgot to complete this. So Abu Zur'a al-Razi, he was a very famous naqid, a critic. Huh? Yeah, yeah. So he said, I observed 80,000 hadith of Ibn Wahab in Misr, and I don't recall even finding one baseless hadith. Meaning that this is meaning that this is not something that was foreign to them. It wasn't strange to them. If they wanted to find out about a narrator, what did they do? They looked at his narrations. They say, okay, let me gather all of his riwayat. Let me gather all of his riwayat, and it'll give me an idea about this person. Now, what's interesting is that we have research indexes and tools available to us today. If I want to find out something, I can just type it in, and I can check all the books that are available in the program. Huh? Yeah, well, it could be about anything, right? I can look up the word aqidah. I can look up the word rice, right? I can look up anything, and any word that I look up, any book that I choose, you will find all of the places that that person's mentioned. He had 80,000 narrations. If you do a search for Abdullah bin Wahab, the same narrator, in all of the books that we have available to us today, you'll find about 45,000 hits. Meaning that this is not even just hadith, by the way. So if he had any ruling in fiqh, his name would be mentioned. If he had anything in tafsir, it would be mentioned. His biography, it would be mentioned. The previous one, just narrations. Just narrations. Meaning that there are so many narrations that they're lost, right? There are so many narrations that have been lost to us, which is why it's so important that we trust the scholars of hadith, because they had access to tools and to chains that we just do not have access to today. The mukhtalitun. So the mukhtalit is somebody who changes, right? Somebody who changes. Uh, so over here, there are two examples. Did it reach the point of causing his narrations to be rejected? Because can a person in old age, can his memory change? It can, but sometimes it changes just slightly, right? So he might forget like where his keys are every day, or he might, yeah, like his short-term memory, but his long-term memory is still sharp. That type of person, his narrations would be, they would still be sound. They'd still be accepted, even though he would be described as mukhtalit, right? Somebody who changed. And then you have some that there was a clear change, right? He even started his long-term memory, it started becoming affected. So this type of person would be rejected. And here are two examples. Sayyid ibn Abi Aruba, his narrations were rejected after his ikhtilat. And then you have Abu Ishaq al-Sabi'i, his narrations continue to be accepted. Um, Sometimes you have somebody who's described as mukhtalit, but you know that when it happened, right? I know when it happened. And if I know when it happened, how does that help me as a hadith scholar? Right. Mhm. Absolutely. So basically, if I know that at the age of 65 he started forgetting, so all of his narrations up until 65, I would accept it. Like after 65, would I reject them? I have to what? I have to investigate them. Meaning that the ones before, it doesn't really require investigation. Is it possible he made a mistake? Possible. But in general, we can accept his narrations. But after he started making mistakes, we definitely have to be cautious, and we definitely have to investigate. Um, oh yeah, the same thing, right? So, because just because somebody changes, it doesn't mean everything he's is wrong, right? It doesn't mean that everything he's mentioning is wrong, and it doesn't mean all of his narrations are mistaken. Ibn Hibban, he said the Mukhtalitin at the end of their lives, like Jariri and Sa'id ibn Abi Aruba and their likes, but we narrate on them in our book and we do not rely on their reports except in the following situations. Meaning that sometimes we what? If I know somebody is Mukhtalit, even in that situations, sometimes I can still take it, right? I can still rely on it. And he says there are two situations where I can rely on it. Number one, those older trustworthy narrators narrate on them before they change. I know for sure. So in this first example, he's saying, when for sure can I take? Right? Before the change. Right? That's number one. And number two, what do you think? Hmm. Huh? I think about it. Remember, we said that this person changed, and Ibn Hibban, a major hadith scholar, he's telling us, like, hey, listen, there are two situations where we can take their hadith. The first situation, we know for sure that it's before he changed. What is the second situation that we can take it? Ah, that's it. Very simple, right? If it's after he changed, I look for, I investigate, but I look for corroborating reports. Let's see what he says. That no, those narrations that those trustworthy narrators agree with. Very logical, right? These are both very logical conclusions, um, and we have no doubt in them. Meaning that okay, this person we have doubt in, right? There's a chain, and we have doubt in this chain because he changed. But I have four other parallel reports that are saying the same thing. So this report I can take it and I can trust it. He also said, no, all right. So, and the reason is very logical, like we mentioned. We know up until this point they were trustworthy, and just because they changed, it doesn't make them untrustworthy anymore, right? They're still trustworthy people, but there's more of a possibility that they make mistakes. And this tells us, and this is very important, that anytime when we talked about adala and dhabt, right, when we talked about a person's trustworthiness and their ability to remember and to recall, which one is being affected? So if a person starts forgetting, does that affect his trustworthiness? Is dhabt, right? So his precision is what's actually being affected there, which is, and we said that when a person's precision is affected, that his hadith are still worthy of being investigated. But if he's not trustworthy, if he's a liar, right, he's a sinner, right? It'd be like, oh no, but his memory is really good. Does it matter? No, it doesn't make a difference, right? His hadith are going to be rejected. Um, so we talked about if I want to explore a narrator and I want to find out about him, we said we look into some of the books that he narrates in. And if I find a narrator in Bukhari and Muslim, what does that usually mean? He's trustworthy, right? If I find a narrator in Bukhari and Muslim, then I will 90% of the time I'm going to assume what? That he's trustworthy, right? 90% of the time I'm going to assume that he's trustworthy. And this is why it's important for us to look at the books that make Sahih a condition. The two most famous ones are Bukhari and Muslim, but these are not the only two books of Sahih. All right. There are two more. Well, actually, there are four more, but we'll talk about two right now that actually have Sahih in the title. Those two are what? Yeah. The Bukhari and Muslim we know. Like, what are the other two? Huh? No. He took a picture. So the other two are Ibn Khuzaymah and Ibn Hibban. Right? Ibn Khuzaymah, Ibn Hibban. And if we want to add more to this, we can. We have by Imam Hakim, it's called Mustadrak. Right. Right. But yeah. If we want to add two more, we can. We can add a Mustadrak al-Hakim. His book is called Mustadrak al-Sahihain. Basically, he wrote a book saying that these hadith should have been included in Bukhari and Muslim. Meaning what? That I feel these hadith are sahih. The last one that can be included is called Al-Hadith al-Mukhtara by Diya al-Maqdisi. And basically, he puts in his introduction, all of the hadith that I put in here are jiyat, meaning that they are sound. They are sound. So you could say that there are 6 books that make sihha or make authenticity a condition to the hadith that they bring. So those books that critique. So we have books of ilal, or books that critique a hadith. Abu Dawud. Jazakallah khair. You can put your phone away, man. So you have Abu Dawud, Tirmidhi, Sunan Kubra, and Nasa'i. Right? These 3 books. Why are they important? Because if they feel a hadith isn't sound, what do? They write it. They write it down. They'll write it and they'll be like, and this hadith is strange, and this hadith is problematic, and this hadith has so and so, and he is a problem. So that gives me, it helps me understand the status of a narrator. And they'll mention the critique when it's necessary. The books of ilal, those books that have hidden defects. So they'll specify hadith that are differed over. What they'll do is they'll say, and this hadith is narrated by so and so on so and so, and the correct narration is da 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 da. Or he made a mistake here. Or they'll say that he said this is the person, but it's actually so and so. Or wahm, right? He made a mistake in this narration. So there are different ways that they mention it, but these are in the books of ilal, are the ones that have hidden defects. The gharib books. So if a person writes or he compiles a hadith book and he says that all of the hadith that I'm putting here are gharaib, they're strange, that immediately for me should be what? A red flag. So if I find a narrator, then it's a red flag for me, right? It's a red flag for me. Because many of these hadith are ones that are mistaken or they have some type of misconception. And the last group of people, the mudallisun. So the mudallisun are those individuals who they remove the intermediary, right? So instead of saying, so Ahmed, he heard it from Khalid, who heard it from Zubair, right? But what Ahmed does is he removes Khalid and he says, Zubair said. He says Zubair said. So over here, it's important to understand the type of tadlis. There are different ways that the mudallisin did the tadlis. Understanding the effect of an'ana, meaning that there are different ways for me to narrate. I can say I heard. I can say it was relayed to me, right? I can say it was narrated to me, right? And these are all very clear ways of narration. But if I say on the authority of, does that show that I clearly heard or listened? No, it doesn't. And this is the way the mudallisin actually narrated a hadith. Why? Because if they say I heard and they didn't hear it, what have they done? They lied. And that would, their hadith would be rejected. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. So if I said Khalid an Ahmed, that means Khalid is narrating on the authority of Ahmed. He Meaning that here, what's a good way of expressing this? Khalid Khalid says that Ahmad is reported to have been saying, to have said, right? So he's not doing jazm, right? He's not saying, oh, I heard him say this. He's basically saying that Ahmad, it is confirmed that Ahmad said this. Does that make sense? Right? So when I say it is confirmed that Ahmad said this, did he say it to me? Not necessarily. Maybe, is it possible? Yeah, right. It's definitely possible, but it's not necessary. It's not necessary. Um, so knowing. I'm sorry. It makes more sense now. Okay, good. So knowing the teachers he directly heard from, meaning that if I know a narrator is a mudallis, if I know that he removes this intermediary, but I know that this person who he's narrating from, that's his direct teacher, will that have an effect? Right? There's more of a chance that he actually heard it. But if I know that this person is not his teacher, right? He died before he was even born, and he says that it's reported that he said, huh? Khalas, that's a red flag right there. I was like, okay, no, I know that he didn't meet him, which is why it's important to understand the narrator himself, right? I need to know when he was born. I need to know when he died, because every time now I look at him in the chain, I will look at the sheikh and I'll see, okay, is it possible that he heard from him or not? Or if I be like, okay, well, it's he never traveled to this place, right? He's saying that he said it, but he never traveled there. For me, that's going to be a red flag. Studying his hadith in the 6 books, and again, and why do we do this? Because it's very possible that Khalid, he says on the authority of Ahmad, and in another hadith on the authority of Ahmad, and in a third hadith on the authority of Ahmad, and then in a fourth hadith he says, I heard from Ahmad. Yes? So once he says, I heard from Ahmad, what information does this give me? All is wrong? Remember, we said the mudallis is not he's not what? He's not a liar. Right? This is important. The mudallis is not a liar. So if he's saying on the authority of, on the authority of, on the authority of, I heard. So what does that, now what information does that benefit me? That Ahmed is what? He heard it directly. That Ahmed is his sheikh. So when he says in these other places, there's a good chance that he heard that as well. There's a good chance that he heard that as well. My sheikh actually has a book on this. It's called Al-Mursal al-Khafi wa ilaqatuhu bit-tadlis. And basically what he does is he studies the narrations of Hassan on Ali radiallahu anh. Yeah, none of them are sound, so it's okay. That's the conclusion. So when Hassan al-Basri does tadlis, we know that there's a good chance that he didn't hear it. He didn't hear it directly, which is why he does on the authority of. And that's it. Alhamdulillah. This is the last section, and I think what adhan is in a few minutes. It's in 10 minutes. 10 minutes is adhan. Okay. خلاص, we'll stop here. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam. And if you guys have any questions on these, so these were the 6. Let me go back to the 6 categories. Here we go. So these are the 6 categories. You guys have any questions on any of these 6 categories and how we would spend time and how we would research them? Or is it very clear? Clear. We'll use the rest of the time to get ready for the salah, inshallah. Khalas, you can leave the chairs. There's class after Maghrib, inshallah. والله أعلم وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.